to Dr. Pepper and Friends, where grit, grace, and wholehearted living come together. And now, here's Dr. Pepper.
Hey, and welcome back to Dr. Pepper and Friends, where grit and grace come together for wholehearted living. So my name is Pepper Pratt, and I'm really glad that you're here. So we're back from some summer episodes after kind of a bit of a break. And have you ever just kind of had one of those seasons where you had, multiple projects going on at once? Since the last episode of Dr. Pepper and Friends, let me tell you some of the things that I've done, okay? We finished a bathroom renovation that started second week of January and it's supposed to last 3 weeks. And we finished mid-April, right? So we're very happy with it. It just took longer than we expected and, of course, cost more than we expected. But in the meantime, when you do things like that, you know how this goes. So while you're doing it, you might as well. So we remodeled 2 other rooms in our house. We kind of did some stuff here at the office, kind of facilitated a little bit of facelift with painting in the common areas in our office, and then also remodeled my office here. And probably the biggest project is I reshot the videos for Rediscover Us. Rediscover Us is an 8-week intensive that I have for couples. They come in for a coaching visit once a week or sometimes telehealth. And then we have videos in between that they watch. And I recorded all these videos back in probably 22 when I started doing this. And they just needed updating. So I didn't even count the number of videos that I'd have to remake until I started doing them. My goal was just to stay 1 week ahead of the 2 couples that were in Rediscover Us at the time. So it took me about 8 or 10 weeks to do it. So I counted them after I finished, and I reshot almost 30 videos. Okay, so that was kind of crazy. So it's kind of nice to return to a summer rhythm and have some big projects off the list. So if you're joining us for the first time, okay, we are picking back up on a series called The Parts Within Us, Healing the Inner System. And with Dr. Pepper and Friends, we just try to do all kinds of things that kind of help people that may or may not be in therapy, but just have some things that they're trying to work through and work out. And a lot of times we'll have guests, and this is a series that I'm just kind of flying solo on, just trying to educate a little bit with clients that I have that are working through this, but also people that are just trying to learn some things about themselves and the way that they tick a little bit. So over the last 2 episodes, we've kind of been laying a foundation, okay? In episode 1, we talked about how so many of the times we kind of feel divided on the inside. I mean, you know the feeling. I mean, there's this part of you that wants to change. There's this part of me that wants to stay safe. There's this part of me that wants to trust. There's this part of me that wants to run. There's this part of me that says, I don't even know what to do. Okay, so that doesn't necessarily mean that you're broken. It just means that you're human. Okay, so we talked about that in episode 1. So if you haven't, maybe go back and pick up the first couple of episodes or rewatch them or listen to them so that we'll be back up to speed. Then in episode 2, we talked about some of the basic internal family systems model. We talked about how, there's just these parts of us and we have these categories. So if you want more of this, check out Jenna Raya Mersma's book. I'll leave that in the show notes. Jenna Raya Mersma wrote a book called Altogether You, and this is from a faith-based perspective. And then Richard Schwartz is also kind of the founder of Internal Family Systems Therapy, and he wrote a book called No Bad Parts. Both of those are excellent books. If you want to check those out, if you want more, you can do that. So on the inside, we have these 3 main categories of parts that really are all just kind of a part of our internal operating system. We talked about managers. We talked about these are the parts of us that try to keep our lives organized and under control. And we talked about firefighters, okay? These are the parts that rush in when the emotions get overwhelming and they try to rescue us from an uncomfortable moment. And then we also talked about exiles. And these are kind of the wounded parts that carry shame and fear and rejection and pain. Now, we're going to talk more about all of those, but today we're going to talk about kind of what may be the most important part of this entire model, And maybe that's not quite right. We're going to talk about what internal family systems says is not even a part at all. It's the part that's called our self. I'm going to refer to it as the governing self. Now I want you to think about kind of what you think of and what you feel when you hear that we're going to talk about the self. What comes to mind for you? So if you're new to internal family systems, then this may be the idea that kind of changes everything, because most of us kind of spend our entire lives believing that we are whatever part is currently the loudest in us. Okay, so if anxiety is loud, we think that we're anxious. If anger is loud, then we think that we're angry. If shame is loud, then we think that we're shameful. Internal family systems says something radically different. It says those are parts of your experience, but they're not the deepest truth about who you really are. Okay, there's something underneath all of them. Okay, something steady, something calm, something compassionate, maybe something that's been there all along. Is called the self, or the governing self. Okay, now when people first hear this, they think, well, the self just sounds selfish. I don't want to just sit around thinking about myself all the time. Well, that's not really what we're talking about. It's not about a big ego. Okay, this is not about self-centeredness. This is not about pride or anything like that. In fact, the governing self tends to look remarkably humble. Okay, the self doesn't have to win every argument. The governing self doesn't have to prove itself. It doesn't have to panic. The self doesn't have to attack. The self doesn't have to run. The self, especially the governing self, is that part of you that leads. Okay, so Richard Schwartz, the founder of internal family system therapy, identifies what we call the 8 C's of the self, and we're going to talk about those. So when your governing self is present, okay, then you're going to notice some of the qualities that are there. And I want you to think about maybe a time that you find yourself demonstrating one of these qualities at times. Chances are that's kind of when you're kind of your truest sense of self, right? So the 8 C's of the self, the first one is calm. Think about a time when you just are able to respond with calmness in the middle of chaos, okay? Another is curiosity, compassion, clarity, confidence, courage. I think even a sense of creativity is a part of the true self. Connectedness is that part of you that wants to bond with other people. Now think about that for a moment. Have you ever had a moment where somebody criticized you and instead of just reacting immediately, you became curious? Okay. That's the more mature governing self that's responding in that moment. Have you ever listened to someone that you disagreed with and you were able to just stay calm, even when they may have been getting really disrupted, right? That's probably the governing self at work, okay? Have you ever felt compassion towards someone that hurt you? Well, maybe that's the self that God intended for you to be, okay? We've all kind of experienced that, and the question isn't really whether that self exists, it's whether that governing self is leading or not, okay? Now, here's where I think faith and internal family systems come together and have kind of a fascinating conversation, and this is one of the reasons that I appreciate Jenna Ryan Mersma's work in Altogether You, that she recognizes kind of this connection. So many Christians hear the word self and they immediately become suspicious, okay? But when I look at the qualities of self, I don't really see arrogance. I don't see something that's, consumed with myself necessarily. It's just an expression of who God's designed us to be. It's that God image, that Christ image in us coming out, okay? So I see and hear kind of echoes of the fruit of the Spirit. I see what a person often looks like when they're walking closely with God. So when you think about it, when I'm in a good place with God, then I'm going to be calm. I'm going to be compassionate. I'm going to be connected. I'm going to be clear. I'm not going to be controlled by fear or dominated by shame. I'm not going to be driven by panic. Now, I'm not saying that the self equals the Holy Spirit's work in us, okay? Internal family systems doesn't necessarily teach that. But I do think that the self may represent something very close to how God has designed us before fear and wounds taught our protectors to take over. You think about Jesus, okay? Throughout the Gospels, people around Jesus are constantly reactive, okay? I mean, the disciples panic, the Pharisees attack, the crowds are demanding all the time. Yet, Jesus remains grounded, he remains present, he's compassionate. He's very clear. There's nothing fuzzy about the things that he has to say, and he's intentional about those. He's not driven by anxiety. He's not hijacked by the fear of a moment. He's not controlled by approval. He leads from this deep center, this deep place of just knowing who he is and what his mission is. And that's kind of what the leadership of that governing self begins to look like. So let's kind of make this practical, okay? Imagine that you've had some criticism at work. Imagine your inner critic wakes up and there's this manager part that starts saying, see, I told you so, you're not good enough, okay? Or maybe that exile, and we'll talk more about exiles, gets activated. It's that younger part of you that's wounded and it's carrying those old wounds and those old feelings of failure. And then suddenly your chest tightens and your stomach knots up, and a firefighter kind of shows up, and maybe you just shut down and you begin to dissociate, or you get defensive, or you look for those things that comfort you like food or whatever it may be. You distract yourself, or maybe you just kind of start binge watching Netflix for 3 hours, or get stuck doom scrolling on your phone. Now imagine a different response, okay? That same criticism happens, but this time the self, the governing self, the one that's present, the one that's kind of the culmination of all of the growth that you've experienced in your life, that's the one that shows up, okay? And the self kind of notices the critic on the inside. The self notices the hurt of that exile. The self notices that urge to just escape in that moment. But instead of becoming those parts, the governing self becomes curious about them. And that's kind of what leadership is, of that governing self. And that's where healing begins to take place. And that's kind of where we're headed. So one of the most common questions that I hear is, how do I access this governing self? And the answer may surprise you, okay? You don't really create that self, you uncover it, right? That self is what God's been doing in you all along. It's already there. All right. So the goal is not to manufacture something new. Okay. The goal is to kind of help the protectors to relax enough so that that self can lead. That governing self can be the one that actually is governing. Okay. It's the one that actually is making the decisions, and the actions are following those decisions. And then the feelings are following the actions. And that's kind of where we're headed next. Because in the next episode, we're going to dive more into these managers, these inner critics, these ways that we organize our life to stay away as much as we can from uncomfortable emotions, okay? And these are the perfectionists on the inside of us. These are the ones that are wanting to be in control all the time and sometimes control other people. These are the people pleasers on the inside of us. These are the ones that are the kind of the overthinkers. And these are the parts in us that kind of work overtime to keep us safe. Now, here's the twist, okay? The parts that often drive us crazy, okay, may be working harder than anybody else to protect us, okay? So these parts aren't all bad. They're actually doing us a service. They're doing us a favor, okay? So until we get to that part, okay, remember, until then, okay, you're not your anxiety. You're not your shame. You're not your anger. You're not your fear. Those may be parts of your experience, but they're not the deepest truth about who you actually are. There is something deeper in us. There is something calmer in us. There is something wiser in us. There is something that's capable of leading in us. And that's when that leader, that governing self, begins to emerge and the whole system begins to heal. So my name is Pepper Pratt, and this is Dr. Pepper and Friends, where grit and grace lead to wholehearted living. I will see you next time as we take this subject just a little bit further.